Imagine for a moment that you are living the worst day of your life. Everything you love and own, everything you poured your time, effort, and care into disappears in the blink of an eye. Your possessions, those you've worked tirelessly to earn, are taken from you without warning. The children you raised with all your love and dedication, the very reason for your existence, lose their lives tragically. And as if that weren't enough, your health deteriorates rapidly, leaving you in constant, excruciating pain with no hope of relief. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's the harsh reality faced by a man named Job. In a single day, he lost everything. Yet instead of succumbing to pain and despair, he did something that defies all logic. He knelt and worshiped God. Under the crushing weight of unimaginable tragedy, his response wasn't bitterness or anger but reverence. For many, this reaction seems irrational or even impossible, which is precisely why Job's story is so profound and powerful. But how could someone, after losing everything, choose worship over cursing? What was it about Job that drove him to act so contrary to what any human might expect in such circumstances? This video isn't just about telling Job's story. It promises to unveil a hidden secret within his experience, a secret that not only explains his reaction, but also has the potential to completely change how you face your own challenges and struggles. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover could radically transform your perspective on suffering and adversity. This insight will not only deepen your understanding of Job's story, but also equip you with tools to face life's toughest moments with newfound strength and purpose. To understand the magnitude of Job's suffering, it's essential to first know what his life was like before tragedy struck. Job was no ordinary man. According to the Bible, there was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was a man of complete integrity, upright and God-fearing, who turned away from evil. Job 1 verse 1. This description introduces us to a man of unshakable character, someone who diligently pursued a life of righteousness and devotion to God. Job's integrity wasn't merely evident in his actions, it was the very foundation of his being. But Job didn't stand out only for his righteousness. He was also an immensely prosperous man. In terms of wealth, Job could be compared to today's great magnates. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 pairs of oxen, and 500 donkeys, along with a large number of servants. In modern terms, this would be akin to someone with vast estates, thriving businesses, and abundant resources. These possessions not only reflected his material success, but also his ability to manage and multiply the resources God had entrusted to him. Despite all his wealth, Job's most treasured possession wasn't material, it was his family. Job had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, who lived in harmony and enjoyed each other's company. Job's relationship with his children reflected his deep devotion and fatherly love. After each celebration his children held, Job would be deeply concerned about their spiritual well-being. Fearing they might have sinned unintentionally, he would offer sacrifices for each of them, saying, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Job 1 verse 5. This constant concern for his children's purity and salvation demonstrates the depth of love and dedication Job had for his family. The story of Job takes an unexpected turn in a celestial setting, where an encounter unfolds that will trigger the most severe trials of his life. In this passage, the sons of God present themselves before the Lord in a solemn assembly, a seemingly routine event in the heavenly realm. Among them is a figure who introduces palpable tension, Satan, the adversary. In his infinite wisdom, God does not overlook Satan's presence and addresses him directly with the question, "Where have you come from?" Satan replies with disdain, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." This response, far from being trivial, reveals that Satan has been observing the world, seeking those he can tempt and destroy. His presence in this encounter is no coincidence. He has a specific purpose in mind. In this context, God mentions Job, a man who exemplifies integrity and faith. God says, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, a man who is blameless and upright, who fears God and shuns evil." With these words, God highlights Job as a model of devotion and righteousness. What follows is a challenge that few could have anticipated. Satan, the perpetual accuser, questions the authenticity of Job's faith. Cunningly, he suggests that Job's devotion is shallow and dependent on his prosperity. He insinuates that Job's faith is transactional, upheld only by the blessings he has received. Satan says, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Job 1 verses 9 to 11. This is Satan's central accusation, that Job's faith is merely a response to material blessings and that, if these were taken away, his devotion would turn into cursing. It's a serious claim, calling into question the authenticity of Job's relationship with God. Satan aims to prove that human faith is fragile, contingent on external circumstances. What happens next is extraordinary. God, fully confident in Job's integrity, accepts the challenge but sets a boundary. "Very well, then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Job 1 verse 12. With this permission, Satan is allowed to test Job, but only within the limits set by God. He cannot harm Job physically. This act by God is not an abandonment of Job, but a profound demonstration of his unwavering trust in his servant. God knows that Job's faith is not rooted in his possessions, but in the core of his character and relationship with him. Thus begins one of the greatest tests ever endured by a human being, a trial that will reveal not only the strength of Job's faith, but also the profound mysteries surrounding suffering, faith, and divine justice. This heavenly challenge is not merely a battle between Job and his circumstances. It is a confrontation between good and evil, between genuine faith and corrosive doubt. What is at stake is far more than Job's possessions or health. It is the truth about the nature of human faith and God's sovereignty in the face of suffering. With this challenge set in motion, Job's life is about to change forever. With Satan's challenge accepted, the trials Job faces begin to unfold relentlessly. In a single day, the upright and prosperous man we first encountered sees his life collapse in a series of unimaginable calamities. The psychological and emotional impact of such tragedies is almost inconceivable. The first wave of trials strikes without warning, unleashing a sequence of disasters that hit Job with devastating cruelty. First, the Sabaeans, a group of raiders, attack and steal Job's oxen and donkeys, killing the servants tending them. This attack not only represents a significant economic loss, but also undermines Job's livelihood, destroying the symbols of his prosperity and stability. Before Job has time to process this blow, another messenger arrives with even graver news. Fire from heaven, likely a lightning storm, has fallen and burned up Job's sheep and more servants. This natural disaster, which could easily be interpreted as a divine judgment, deepens Job's shock and despair at the scale of his loss. The calamities continue. A third messenger reports that the Chaldeans, divided into 3 raiding parties, have attacked and stolen Job's camels, killing more of his servants. This blow erases the last vestiges of Job's wealth, leaving him without means of transport or trade, isolated in his suffering. Finally, the most crushing news of all arrives. A strong wind, possibly a tornado, collapses the house where Job's children are gathered, killing all 10 of them instantly. In a single day, Job loses every one of his children, the most precious part of his life, the ones for whom he prayed constantly. This tragedy not only ends his family line, but threatens to utterly break his spirit. Job's response to this series of catastrophes is extraordinary. Instead of surrendering to despair, he rises, tears his robe, and shaves his head, traditional expressions of grief in his culture. These actions convey the depth of his sorrow and his recognition of the gravity of his losses. What he does next, however, is even more astonishing. Job falls to the ground in worship and declares one of the most powerful statements of faith in Scripture. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job 1 verse 21. With these words, Job not only accepts his fate, but reaffirms his trust in God's sovereignty. He acknowledges that everything he had was given by God, and that it is God's right to take it away. This acceptance, free of resentment or bitterness, is a testament to Job's profound faith. While he does not understand why these events have occurred, he refuses to curse God, demonstrating spiritual resilience that defies human comprehension. But Job's trials are far from over. Prostrated by Job's unwavering integrity, Satan receives permission from God to inflict even greater suffering, this time targeting Job's physical body. Job is afflicted with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. These boils consume him with unbearable pain, leaving his body weak and disfigured. In his misery, Job sits among ashes, a symbol of total humiliation, and uses a piece of broken pottery to scrape his wounds, desperately seeking some relief amid his torment. In this state of extreme suffering, even Job's closest relationship, his bond with his wife, begins to strain. Overwhelmed by the sight of her husband's anguish and her own grief, she urges Job to curse God and die, a suggestion born out of desperation and perhaps a temptation to abandon faith in the face of overwhelming suffering. But Job, though deeply wounded by his circumstances and her words, responds firmly. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Job 2 verse 10. With this statement, Job demonstrates a profound understanding of life and faith. He acknowledges that life brings both blessings and trials, and that both come from the hand of God. His faith is unconditional, not dependent on favorable circumstances. Job teaches us that true faith remains steadfast even when everything else falls apart, that worshiping God is not only about gratitude for the good, but also about trusting Him in the midst of suffering. Job's trials confront us with the reality of human suffering and challenge us to reflect on how we respond to adversity. Through his story, Job shows that, even when we cannot understand why bad things happen, we can find strength in a faith that transcends pain and clings to hope in God, even when all seems lost. Job's trials not only reveal his character, but also invite us to examine the nature of our own faith. Amid the overwhelming suffering that Job endures, a crucial moment unfolds in his story: the arrival of his friends. In difficult times, the support of those around us can be an anchor in the storm. However, the visit of Job's friends offers a profound lesson about the nature of comfort and the limitations of human understanding when faced with another's pain. When news of Job's tragedy spreads, 3 of his closest friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, make a long journey to be with him. These men represent different perspectives and sources of wisdom from their time. Although they come from afar, their purpose is noble: to comfort Job and offer support in his suffering. When they arrive and see Job, they are confronted with a reality far worse than they had imagined. The man they had known as prosperous and healthy is now unrecognizable. His body is covered in painful sores, His face reflects the profound anguish of a shattered soul, and his posture in the ash heap reveals utter despair. The sight of their friend in such a state is so shocking that they are rendered speechless. The friend's initial reaction is significant. Instead of speaking, they simply sit with Job on the ground. For 7 days and 7 nights, they do not utter a single word, accompanying him in his pain without attempting to explain or alleviate it. This silence is not a sign of indifference, but a profound respect for the magnitude of Job's suffering. In ancient culture, silence was a way of honoring grief and pain, allowing the mourner to process their loss without the intrusion of hollow words. Their act of sitting silently with Job symbolizes solidarity, a gesture that says, "We are here with you in this pain, even though we cannot fully understand it." The 7 days of silence may be the most appropriate response the friends could have offered at that moment. It is an implicit acknowledgement that Job's suffering is so profound that any words would be inadequate and might even diminish the gravity of his pain. This silence also reflects a universal truth. In moments of extreme suffering, what we often need most is not explanations or solutions but the quiet, steady presence of those who care. Job's pain transcends logic or conventional comfort, and in these moments, empathy is best expressed through presence and respect for the grieving process rather than through words or advice. However, silence has its limits. After 7 days, the period of reflection and mourning gives way to dialogue that, despite good intentions, reveals the friend's inability to grasp the true meaning of Job's suffering. The arrival of Job's friends teaches a valuable lesson about the role of friendship and comfort in times of sorrow. Silence can be more powerful than words when faced with inexplicable pain. It reminds us that in our own lives, when we stand beside someone enduring great suffering, the best thing we can offer is often simply our presence and willingness to listen, without trying to force explanations or solutions. As we will see in the next part of the story, the situation begins to change when Job's friends break their silence, attempting to find answers where none may exist. Their response will mark a turning point in the narrative, demonstrating how even the best intentions can falter when confronted with the profound mysteries of human suffering. After 7 days and nights of silence, Job finally breaks his muteness, initiating a series of intense and profound dialogues between him and his friends. These exchanges become the heart of the narrative, delving into universal themes such as suffering, divine justice, and the nature of faith. They also reveal the gap that often exists between the personal experience of pain and the explanations offered to make sense of it. Unable to contain his anguish, Job breaks the silence with a heart-rending lament. He does not curse God, but instead curses the day of his birth, wishing he had never seen the light of day. His lament is a raw expression of his suffering. "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, 'A boy is conceived.'" Job 3 verse 3. Job laments not having died at birth, which he believes would have spared him from the extreme suffering he now faces. This lament is significant because it reflects the depth of Job's pain and his despair. His wish to have never been born shows that his suffering has surpassed his ability to endure it. Yet, even as Job expresses his anguish in stark terms, he does not accuse God of injustice. Instead, he demonstrates the fragility of humanity in the face of unbearable pain. Hearing Job's lament, his friends feel compelled to respond. Each offers their perspective on Job's situation, attempting to make sense of his suffering based on their understanding of divine justice. However, while their intentions are to comfort him, their words often deepen the wounds of Job's already broken spirit. Eliphaz is the first to speak. As the oldest and possibly the wisest of the three, he draws on tradition and spiritual experience to frame his argument. To Eliphaz, suffering is a form of divine discipline, a way for God to correct and strengthen those he loves. He suggests that Job's suffering must be the consequence of some hidden sin, even if Job is unaware of it. Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? Job 4 verse 7. Eliphaz also recounts a mystical vision in which a spirit whispered to him that no human is pure in God's sight, implying that suffering is inevitable for mortals due to their imperfection. His advice to Job is to accept this discipline, seek God, and trust that he will be restored once he learns the lesson God intends to teach. Bildad speaks next, taking a more direct and less empathetic approach. For Bildad, God's justice is absolute and unquestionable. If Job is suffering, it must be because of sin, either his own or that of his children. Bildad bluntly states, "When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin." Job 8 verse 4. He advises Job to earnestly seek God, repent for any sins he may have committed, and trust that God will restore him if he is truly innocent. Bildad's worldview is rigid, equating suffering with sin and prosperity with righteousness, leaving no room for complexity or mystery. Zophar, the last to speak, is the harshest of the three. He claims that Job is being punished less than he deserves. Zophar shows little patience for Job's complaints, insisting that Job must have committed a grave sin. He even suggests that Job should be grateful his punishment isn't worse. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin. Job 11 verse 6. Zophar's theology is uncompromising, portraying God as just but severe, with no tolerance for ambiguity in the relationship between sin and suffering. He urges Job to stop complaining and submit to God's will, assuring him that repentance will bring restoration. Job's responses to his friends are a mixture of self-defense and rebuttal of their simplistic arguments. He adamantly denies that his suffering is due to any specific sin, maintaining his innocence. "I will maintain my innocence and never let go of it. My conscience will not reproach me as long as I live." Job 27 verse 5. Job is deeply hurt by his friends' lack of understanding and their insistence on blaming him for his misfortune. Rather than offering comfort, their words feel like unjust accusations, adding to his pain. He criticizes their lack of empathy and their rigid theology, which fails to account for his genuine suffering and innocence. In his defense, Job also expresses his confusion and despair at what he perceives as divine injustice. He laments the prosperity of the wicked while the righteous, like himself, suffer without cause. This leads him to reflect on the very nature of divine justice and the inscrutability of God's ways. "Though I cry violence, I get no response. Though I call for help, there is no justice." Job 19 verse 7. Despite his suffering and the inadequate responses of his friends, Job does not abandon his faith in God. In one of his most powerful declarations, Job proclaims a trust that transcends his pain. "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." Job 19 verse 25. This affirmation is a testament to his unwavering faith, even when all evidence suggests he has been forsaken. The dialogues between Job and his friends offer a profound exploration of the nature of suffering and the difficulty of finding satisfying answers in the face of pain. Through these exchanges, the story of Job reveals the limitations of human understanding when grappling with the mysteries of God's ways, and the significance of a faith that endures questioning and hardship. The insistence of Job's friends on viewing his suffering as deserved punishment highlights a human tendency to oversimplify complex situations, seeking blame where none may exist. Meanwhile, Job's steadfastness in his pain teaches us that integrity and genuine faith can coexist with doubt and questioning. In the next part of the story, a new character, Elihu, offers a fresh perspective on the debate, paving the way for God's direct intervention. After the intense dialogues between Job and his friends, the story introduces a new character, Elihu. This young man, who has remained silent until now, decides to intervene in the discussion, offering a fresh perspective. Elihu's arrival marks a turning point in the narrative, preparing the way for God's final response and emphasizing key aspects of suffering, divine justice, and human humility. Elihu is introduced as the youngest of those present, which explains why he has refrained from speaking until this moment. In the culture of the time, deference to age and experience was essential, and Elihu had patiently waited for the elders to finish speaking. However, after hearing Job and his friends, Elihu is indignant at what he perceives as a failure on both sides to truly grasp the situation. Elihu explains that he has remained silent out of respect for his youth, but now feels compelled to speak, driven by a deep sense of frustration. He is angry at Job's friends for failing to refute Job, and at Job for seeming to justify his own righteousness more than God's. "I am full of words, and the spirit within me compels me. Inside I am like bottled up wine, like new wineskins ready to burst." Job 32 verses 18 to 19. This analogy reflects Elihu's urgency to express what he believes must be said. Elihu begins by affirming that God is just and his justice should not be questioned. Unlike Job's other friends, Elihu does not accuse Job directly of specific sins, but suggests that suffering might serve a purpose beyond mere retribution. He introduces the idea that suffering can be a form of divine discipline, a way for God to correct, teach, and guide people toward a deeper understanding of his will. Elihu emphasizes that God's ways are greater than human understanding, and that his motives cannot always be comprehended. God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty and firm in his purpose. Job 36 verse 5. According to Elihu, humans must recognize their limitations and approach God with humility, accepting that his ways are both mysterious and just, even when they seem incomprehensible. A key point Elihu raises is that suffering is not always punitive. It can be a tool God uses to alert people, correct their paths, and guide them toward greater spiritual awareness. He suggests that pain can serve as a form of divine communication, a wake-up call that leads people to reflect on their lives and seek a closer relationship with God. He makes them listen to correction and commands them to repent of their evil. Job 36 verse 10. This perspective is more nuanced than that of Job's other friends. Elihu sees suffering not simply as punishment, but as an opportunity for spiritual growth. Through hardship, individuals can become more aware of their dependence on God and develop greater humility and wisdom. Elihu also underscores the greatness of God, highlighting that his power and wisdom far exceed human comprehension. In doing so, he reminds Job of the need to maintain reverence and submission to God, even amid suffering. Elihu describes God's majesty in awe-inspiring terms, urging Job to remember that, while pain is real and difficult, God's sovereignty remains absolute. God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding. Job 37 verse 5. Although Elihu displays more insight than Job's other friends, he also critiques Job for focusing on his own righteousness rather than God's. Elihu feels that Job has come dangerously close to accusing God of injustice, which Elihu considers unacceptable. His message to Job is clear. Though Job suffers, he must remember his limited understanding and trust in God's justice, even when it is not immediately apparent. "Be patient with me a little longer, and I will show you that there is more to be said in God's behalf." Job 36 verse 2. Elihu's intervention serves as a bridge between the speeches of Job's friends and God's final response. While Elihu's words do not resolve the dilemma of Job's suffering, they prepare the ground for God to speak by reminding both Job and the audience of the importance of humility and reverence before the divine. Elihu offers a broader perspective on suffering and divine justice, suggesting that there is more at play than humans can comprehend. He reminds us that, while suffering is a profound mystery, it can also have a redemptive purpose, guiding people toward a deeper relationship with God. His speech sets the stage for the climax of the story, where God Himself will address Job, revealing truths that transcend human understanding. After the lengthy debates and questioning between Job, his friends, and Elihu, the most awaited moment of the story finally arrives: God's response. This divine intervention is not only the narrative climax of the book of Job, but also a pivotal moment in the exploration of suffering, justice, and divine wisdom. God reveals Himself to Job in a whirlwind. This choice of manifestation is no coincidence. The whirlwind symbolizes God's uncontrollable power and majesty, transcending human understanding. This appearance serves as both a revelation and a reminder that God is sovereign over all creation, and that His wisdom far exceeds human comprehension. From the whirlwind, God begins to speak, but in an unexpected way. Rather than offering detailed explanations for Job's suffering or addressing the accusations of injustice directly, God poses a series of rhetorical questions that emphasize the vastness of His creation and the limitations of human understanding. These questions are not mere inquiries, but challenges that underscore the immensity of divine knowledge and power compared to human smallness. They fall into two main categories: the creation of the world and nature, and the mysteries of living beings, particularly animals. God begins by reminding Job that he was not present at the creation of the world. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand." Job 38 verse 4. This question is not meant to elicit an answer, but to highlight the gap between divine and human wisdom. God reminds Job that he cannot grasp the full picture, as he was neither a witness to creation nor does he understand its foundations. God continues by describing how He set the earth's foundations, restricted the seas, and commanded the arrival of day and night. "Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place?" Job 38 verse 12. These questions demonstrate God's absolute control over the cosmos, from the vast stars to the daily cycle of light and darkness. God also speaks of nature with precision and detail, showcasing His unfathomable wisdom. He asks if Job knows the storehouses of snow, or can loosen the cords of Orion, referring to natural phenomena and constellations that symbolize both the known and mysterious aspects of creation. "Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail?" Job 38 verse 22. Turning to animals, God describes their characteristics in ways that escape human control or understanding. From the freedom of wild creatures to the strength of a horse in battle, each description serves as a reminder that God is the creator and sustainer of all life. He speaks of the ostrich, which lays its eggs in the sand without concern, and the horse, which charges fearlessly into battle, showing that nature holds a wisdom beyond human logic. "Do you give the horse its strength, or clothe its neck with a flowing mane?" Job 39 verse 19. God concludes His discourse by describing two legendary creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan, symbols of power and chaos in ancient mythology. These creatures, representing forces beyond human control, remain under God's dominion. By asking if Job contained Leviathan, God underscores that there are powers in the universe that only He can govern. Faced with this overwhelming display of power and wisdom, Job recognizes the limits of his understanding and the insignificance of his complaints compared to the grandeur of God's plan. Job does not receive a direct explanation for his suffering, but he is given a broader perspective that places his experience within a much larger context. Humbled, Job responds, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." Job 42 verse 2. He acknowledges that he has spoken of things he did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. Job 42 verse 3. This admission marks a crucial shift in Job's perspective, moving from questioning God to submitting to his infinite wisdom. Job concludes with one of the most profound declarations in the Bible. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job 42 verse 5. This statement suggests that through his suffering and encounter with God, Job has gained a deeper, more personal understanding of God beyond theoretical or traditional knowledge. Finally, Job repents in dust and ashes, not because he sinned as his friends suggested, but because he now recognizes the vastness and transcendence of God's plan. He realizes his perspective had been limited and his confidence in his own righteousness misguided. God's response to Job invites us to reflect on divine sovereignty and mystery. While we may not always receive the answers we seek, the story of Job teaches us that a greater purpose underlies our experiences, even if it is beyond our ability to comprehend. God's greatness surpasses all human understanding, calling us to live with humility and reverence. After Job's astonishing encounter with God, where the majesty and mystery of the divine plan are revealed, the story turns toward restoration. This final part not only concludes Job's narrative, but also offers a profound lesson on grace, forgiveness, and divine restoration. Job's restoration is both material and spiritual, and its outcome highlights God's justice and mercy. Following the dialogue between God and Job, before proceeding with restoration, God turns his attention to Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. These friends, who had attempted to comfort Job but ended up accusing him unjustly, now face divine anger for not having spoken rightly about God and his nature. God says to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My anger burns against you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." Job 42 verse 7. Here, God makes a crucial distinction. Although Job questioned and wrestled with his suffering, he never betrayed his faith in God or misrepresented his character, unlike his friends. God's rebuke of Job's friends serves as a lesson about the importance of humility and caution when interpreting someone else's suffering. Relying on their own understanding, Job's friends assumed they could explain his suffering as direct punishment for sin. However, God makes it clear that his justice and purposes are far more complex than human reasoning can grasp. To repair the harm caused by their words, God instructs Job's friends to offer a sacrifice. "Now take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." Job 42 verse 8. This act is significant for several reasons. First, it shows that despite their mistake, Job's friends have the opportunity to be forgiven, but that forgiveness depends on Job's intercession. Second, it demonstrates the power of forgiveness and the importance of intercession within a community of faith. Job, who had been hurt by his friends' words, now has the opportunity to show them grace by praying for their restoration. The obedience of Job's friends and Job's intercessory prayer mark a moment of reconciliation. God accepts Job's prayer, and thus, the friends are forgiven. This event underscores the value of forgiveness and reconciliation in restoring human relationships, and the importance of community in God's plan. After the act of intercession and forgiveness, God restores Job in a way that exceeds what he had lost. The Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. Job 42 verse 10. This material restoration is astonishing. Job, who had lost his herds, servants, and wealth, receives double of everything he once possessed. His life, devastated by tragedy, is now once again filled with abundance. This doubling of his possessions not only symbolizes God's blessing, but also affirms that divine justice, though sometimes mysterious, is real and manifests in the lives of those who remain faithful. Job's brothers, sisters, and acquaintances come to comfort him and celebrate his restoration. They bring him gifts of money and gold, symbolizing their respect and joy for the new blessing of God in his life. This act of community and support highlights the restoration not only of Job's material possessions, but also of the social and familial relationships that had been strained during his suffering. Job's restoration is not limited to material possessions. God also grants him a new family. Job once again has 7 sons and 3 daughters, the same number of children as before, symbolizing the complete restoration of his family life. While the loss of his first children cannot be undone, the arrival of these new children represents the continuation of life and God's blessing. Job's daughters are described as the most beautiful in all the land, and in an extraordinary act for the time, Job grants them an inheritance alongside their brothers. This detail not only highlights Job's generosity, but also suggests a sense of equality and respect for his daughters that surpasses the cultural norms of his era. It reflects an internal transformation in Job, one that demonstrates a deeper understanding and application of divine justice and mercy in his own life. Job's restoration is not merely a return to his former state. It is a transformation that encompasses material, social, and spiritual dimensions. Job lives a long life after these events, seeing up to the 4th generation of his descendants. This longevity and the sight of his future generations symbolize God's blessing and the fullness of life that Job experiences after his suffering. However, the true significance of Job's restoration goes beyond the simple return of what was lost. This restoration is a manifestation of God's grace, which not only repairs but transforms. Job not only recovers his possessions and family, but also gains a deeper understanding of God and a personal experience of his presence and sovereignty. The story of Job shows us that while suffering is real and can be devastating, it does not have the final word. Faith, integrity, and trust in God can lead to a restoration that surpasses human expectations, one that encompasses all aspects of life and reflects the justice and mercy of a God who is sovereign over all things. Job's restoration is a powerful reminder that, even though we may not understand suffering or God's ways, we can trust that He is just and good. Through Job's story, we learn that genuine faith is not about avoiding trials, but about standing firm in the midst of them, trusting that God has a purpose greater than our current circumstances. The story of Job is not merely a tale of suffering and restoration, but a profound exploration of faith, divine justice, and the purpose of suffering. After witnessing Job's trials, his dialogue with God, and his eventual restoration, a crucial question remains: what do we truly learn from Job's experience? What is the hidden secret in this story? A secret that has the power to change how we face our own difficulties. The first great secret revealed through Job's life is the nature of true faith. Job's faith does not depend on circumstances. When everything around him collapses, Job maintains his integrity and devotion to God, even when he does not understand why he is suffering. This teaches us that true faith is not measured by the absence of suffering, but by the ability to trust in God, even when everything seems to be going wrong. Job does not deny or minimize his pain. He expresses it with complete honesty, but never abandons his faith in God. Even when accused by his friends and filled with questions himself, Job clings to the conviction that God is sovereign and just, even if his suffering seems to contradict this belief. His famous cry of hope, "I know that my Redeemer lives," Job 19 verse 25, encapsulates this unshakable faith. It is a declaration of trust in future redemption and in God's ultimate justice, even when everything in the present seems dark. The second secret revealed by Job's story is the potential of suffering to lead us to a deeper, more personal knowledge of God. Before his trials, Job knew of God by hearsay. His faith was sincere but rooted in an understanding that had not yet been tested in the crucible of suffering. Through his trials, Job not only questions and struggles, but also comes to experience God in a more intimate and direct way. When God finally responds to Job, he does not provide simple answers or detailed explanations. Instead, he reveals his majesty and power, reminding Job that the universe is far more vast and complex than he can comprehend. This revelation does not explain Job's suffering, but gives him a new perspective. 5 years had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job 42 verse 5. This marks the true turning point in Job's spiritual life, where his knowledge of God shifts from theoretical to experiential. This spiritual growth through suffering is central to Job's story. It teaches us that trials are not merely obstacles to overcome, but opportunities to deepen our relationship with God. In the midst of difficulties, we can be led to a greater understanding of his character, justice, and mercy. This does not mean that suffering is good in itself, but it demonstrates that God can redeem it and use it for our growth and transformation. The third lesson we draw from Job's story is the transformation that occurs when we move from a theoretical knowledge of God to a personal experience of his presence. Before his suffering, Job was a righteous man, but his relationship with God was based on what he had learned and experienced in a life of prosperity and justice. After his suffering, Job emerges with a deeper faith, one that has been tested and refined in the fire of adversity. This transformation is reflected in the way Job speaks of God at the end of his story. God is no longer just the one who blesses or protects him, but the one whose greatness and sovereignty encompass everything, even the mystery of suffering. Job's experience teaches us that there is a level of knowledge and relationship with God that can only be attained through life's hardest trials. It is often in the experience of pain and struggle that we see God most clearly, and our lives are most profoundly transformed.